Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Friday, August 6th, 2021, and I know what you might be thinking. Last video I told you that I was getting my wisdom teeth removed this morning, and I did. Good for me, though, that I actually feel well enough to make this video. I wanted to ensure that I would have as little of a time off from creating videos for you guys because a lot is happening politically speaking. I already have my next 3 videos lined up, and I'm really trying to get them out of the way at least a little bit ahead of time. That way, once the pain actually starts hitting, because right now I don't feel much in terms of pain because I am right out of it. I mean, I got my wisdom teeth removed 6 hours ago. But, other than that, I'm feeling fine, and I've decided that I'm comfortable enough to make this video, and I know in about 2 or 3 days I will be in unbearable pain and will not even think about my channel at all. So here we go, talking about the Florida gubernatorial election today. So what actually happened? Why are we talking about this? Well, recently, and I mean quite literally recently, on August 3rd, St. Pete polls released their new polls for the state of Florida in the gubernatorial election in 2022. Now, the only data we had received before then was from the political matrix back in June and also June. Then we actually saw a St. Pete's poll, I think, way early on, but other than that, we hadn't really seen much data from this state of Florida. Now, the most recent poll that we've seen from the state of Florida has pertains to the United States Senate, so we're going to ignore that. We're not going to focus on this Marco Rubio-Val Demings matchup, but more so on the gubernatorial election, in which we see Ron DeSantis with a pretty large lead over Nikki Fried and Charlie Crist in this race. Now, there's one candidate in particular who seems to do much better than the other, and that is Charlie Crist, a United States representative and actually the former governor of Florida. Now, you also might remember that I had said in the past that Democrats really don't have much luck in the state of Florida. Their governors have been Republicans for decades now. Not a single Democratic governor has been in office in the state of Florida. So then you ask, why is Charlie Crist? Why am I referring to him as a former governor? Was he a governor back in the 70s, back in the 80s? No. Charlie Crist was the governor most recently as 2006 through 2010, actually leaving office in 2011. So what happened? Charlie Crist used to be a Republican. That's right. The one seemingly frontrunner within this race has the former history of being a member of the Republican Party. Then he switched over to become an independent, and now he serves in the United States House of Representatives as a Democrat. I mean, this guy has been a part of every party so far, which is quite interesting to see. But also, it is fascinating to see that Ron DeSantis hasn't lost a poll that you can actually take a look at since polling has even began about this race, except for one person. That's Charlie Crist. And the reason why I find this to be quite interesting is the fact that Nikki Fried, despite her being the only statewide Democrat, doesn't even seem to be topping Ron DeSantis. Right now, Charlie Crist is ahead of him by 2 percentage points. And looking at the electoral history of the state and also Charlie Crist's electoral history, he has actually gotten pretty lucky. In 2006, he won this election despite 2006 being a very much Republican wave year. It was quite interesting to see how he was able to win as a Republican, under all of these circumstances. Democrats won back control of the House and the Senate in 2006. Fast forward to 2010, rather than run for governor again, instead he decided to run for United States Senate. He is the reason Marco Rubio is in the United States Senate in so many ways. The Democrats ran against Charlie Crist, who Charlie Crist ran against Marco Rubio. If you add up the votes between the Democrats and the independents, either Charlie Crist or Kendrick Meek would be the senator from Florida, not Marco Rubio. Rubio won by a plurality, then went on to 2016 and won by a majority, but this technically was preventable had the Crist and Meek coalitions been combined, but neither of them could kick each other out of the race because of election loss in the state of Florida. And then you take a look at Charlie Crist now. He represents a safe district. He really isn't in a position where you would expect it to be competitive whatsoever. The 13th district of the state of Florida is, Cook PVI is even, but he should be safe. In 2020, he won with 53% of the vote. In 2018, he won with 58% of the vote. In fact, in 2016, he flipped it, despite 2016 being a very good year for Republicans and an even better year for Republicans, specifically in the state of Florida. Marco Rubio winning by 8 points statewide, and Donald Trump flipping the state from being in Obama's column back in 2012. So while the Cook PVI may say it's even, he's actually in a pretty good position and will likely do well across the St. Petersburg area. It's a quite interesting district to see, something that he might be able to take in terms of electability across the state. And then, I also do want to point out the electoral history of Nikki Fried, who was actually elected back in 2018. She defeated Matt Caldwell in the Florida Agricultural Commissioner race, and this isn't exactly an overwhelmingly important position. It's just a point to think, it's something to point out that the Democratic Party had their first and only victory in 2018 in a really non-consequential race, but now Nikki Fried is the only elected statewide Democrat since 2012 running for United States governor. Running for Florida governor, not United States Senate. I don't know why I keep confusing the two. But you'll notice here that despite this, she seems to be lagging behind Charlie Crist, and I think it's because Charlie Crist has a much bigger name ID than Nikki Fried. While Nikki Fried is a statewide position, you can ask yourself, if your state has a commissioner of agriculture, do you know who it is? Do you know who your state's attorney general is? I mean, if you're watching this channel, you probably do, but most people do not. Most people wouldn't recognize Nikki Fried as an average name across the state of Florida. Would they recognize Ron DeSantis? Absolutely. Would they recognize Charlie Crist? Absolutely. Someone who ran for the United States Senate, served as the United States governor, served in other statewide positions, and now serves in the House of Representatives, going from Republican to Independent to Democrat. This man has been mentioned all across party lines everywhere. Campaigned with John McCain, then went on to endorse, Biden for president in 2020. Obviously, this guy is someone who you might see regardless of what political party that you are on. And if you're looking at the history of Ron DeSantis in terms of his electoral history, well, first things first, he was a representative. He won back in 2016 overwhelmingly. Went on to 2018 and won by an extremely narrow amount. Ron DeSantis won by 0.4%. Now, Florida had a very poor result, I would say, for the Democratic Party. They should have won these races had they played their cards correctly. Rick Scott, while being a popular governor, also won the Senate election here, but Bill Nelson was the incumbent, and Bill Nelson lost by just 0.2%. Out of 8 million ballots cast, Bill Nelson lost by 11,000 votes. That is embarrassing, I will say. I will say this is a completely preventable loss for the Democratic Party. Bill Nelson didn't seem to reach out to minority voters as much as previous Democrats had. And if you take a look at some of these margins in areas such as Miami-Dade County, Bill Nelson actually underperformed Hillary Clinton, yet came closer statewide. So had he just tapped into the same voting group and won by the same margin as Hillary Clinton in a much better year for Democrats, Bill Nelson would have been reelected to the United States Senate, and Andrew Gillum would be the governor of the state of Florida. It seems that Florida is one of those states where Democrats always have narrow margins but never actually end up winning. They come so close but are yet so far. These 4-year terms and 6-year terms are really difficult for Democrats to get around. They could have had a Democratic senator from Florida, but now there isn't one. They could have had a Democratic governor running for re-election now, but now there isn't one. And Ron DeSantis was largely popular regarded a few months ago. But his approval rating seems to have dropped a little bit, and we'll talk about why. Maybe this is why Charlie Crist's numbers are much higher than they should have been, or they have been in the past, according to the political matrix. So let's take a look. Ron DeSantis, as reported back around May time period, was one of the most popular governors in America, with 64% of Florida voters approving of the job that he's doing, with just 24% who disapprove. Now, I know anecdotal evidence is nothing that I like to go ahead and use, but I do remember talking to some of my friends who go to universities such as UCF and UF, which are, technically speaking, should be areas in which there are plenty of left-wing voters. I mean, it's a college campus. How much more stereotypical can you get for a Democratic-based electorate? But I asked them, and I talked to them about whether or not their peers really disapproved of Ron DeSantis. And I understand that the circumstances were different under COVID-19, but many of them had very positive things to say about them. They felt as if that they were having much better college experiences relative to some of their peers, and that the COVID restrictions were just enough in Florida, even though Florida was and continues to be one of the worst states for COVID-19 across the nation. Now, I don't know if this was just a COVID-19 response or something else, but Ron DeSantis was seemingly more popular than I would expect from a college campus, especially when these regions are typically Democratic strongholds. And for younger voters, people that I had known who supported Joe Biden in the 2020 election also said that they did approve of Governor Ron DeSantis at the time. But this was months ago. His approval rating has seemingly dwindled down to not so high. This is a new poll released in August of 2021. In which Ron DeSantis has only 44% in terms of approval. That is a 20-point reduction in just around 3 months. And the answer as to why this happened is very simple. It's COVID-19. We are starting to see this resurface as something that seemingly was not so important, with a 7-day average of 10,000, 12,000 cases back in June of 2021, now all the way up, back at over 100,000 cases per day. I mean, we are reaching levels of the pandemic that we hadn't reached until the holiday season back in 2020. It's so unfortunate to see, and the answer for this would be to get vaccinated, and that's what Ron DeSantis is trying to push right now. But it seems to be a little too late. The voters in the state of Florida seem to have turned on Ron DeSantis. with a 44% approval rating in this same poll from St. Pete polls, Ron DeSantis loses to Charlie Crist. So what would happen? Why is this monumental? Well, Florida in the Senate election, I already have in the likely Republican column because Marco Rubio is likely to win this Senate race. But for the gubernatorial election, I also expect it to be a likely margin for Ron DeSantis, or at least I did in the past. I think that this race certainly could narrow up in particular because of the resurgence of COVID-19. You see, COVID-19 may not have been a popular issue back in June and thus prompted the popular approval rating of Ron DeSantis. But now that it's a popular issue and now that it's something that is clearly impacting those specifically in the state of Florida, you can see a lot of these counties are in the very bad areas. Now it starts to be important. Because this Delta variant is more deadly, because this Delta variant is more transmissible, more people are going to be impacted. But regions of the country, more so Democratic regions, are less impacted by it. Why? Because they have vaccinated individuals. They have way more vaccinated individuals than people in Florida, than people in Georgia, Louisiana, Arkansas, Alabama, states where COVID-19 is hitting them very, very hard. And the Republican Party recognizes this. That's why you're starting to see Donald Trump's former press secretary go on to Fox News and say, Donald Trump got the vaccine, you should go out and get it too. That's why you see Ron DeSantis go out on television across the state of Florida and say, get vaccinated. That's why you're starting to see Alabama's Governor Kay Ivey say this is a pandemic of the unvaccinated, because they're not wrong. These Democratic states are handling fine. A lot of them are in areas where the COVID-19 rate is not substantial or higher. In my county, Prince George's County, we just got upgraded to substantial. But I can't even imagine the horror that it would be living in one of these deep red counties. And I don't mean that politically speaking. I mean that in terms of COVID-19. This is much worse across the country than it is here. And people are still masking up here. Down there, people aren't masking up, they're not getting vaccinated, and they are, typically speaking, Republican Party voters and those who approve of the lessened COVID mandates. But once they start to realize, and unfortunately if this is the thing that is the wake-up call, which has been an unfortunate reality for many Americans across the nation, if they are personally impacted by COVID-19 by the means of a family member dying, by means of them being put on a ventilator, by means of really anything there, proving to be super harmful for them to realize that this COVID-19, this virus is very serious, that the vaccine is legitimate. What it would take for them to get there is unfortunate. But once that happens, these voters will go under a different type of political realignment. While it may not be all of a sudden they're hard right to hard left, it will raise questions to them, at least personally speaking, about why the governor in Arkansas didn't impose mask mandates. Why are my kids going to school in Mississippi when they don't need to wear masks, especially if they can't get vaccinated? If my grandmother or my father or my mother dies from COVID-19, or my sister or brother dies from COVID-19, why aren't they taking higher action about it? It may not have been super important when COVID was starting to die down and a lot of people were getting vaccinated, but the Delta variant impacts many, many people. And vaccinated people, unfortunately, can be transmissible with COVID-19. It just won't impact them nearly as bad as those without the vaccine. I kid you not. I mean, you could be vaccinated, test positive for COVID-19, test negative 5 days later. But for someone who's unvaccinated, you might be in the hospital 5 days later. You never know. The vaccine is there to help you. So for Ron DeSantis in Florida, I know we went off a little bit of a tangent here, but it is all relevant because Florida is one of the worst states in the entire nation for COVID-19. And that can single-handedly explain the change in voter sentiment. The approval rating of DeSantis does not drop 20 points for fun. Ron DeSantis just doesn't fall out of public favor just because Florida people are in a different type of mood today. That's not how this works. Florida is almost always a competitive state, and Republicans almost always have the advantage. And for Ron DeSantis to be underwater to at least one of the Democratic candidates is interesting to see and is super important because you understand why it's happening, and it can explain a lot of the actions that Ron DeSantis is now taking in terms of handling the pandemic. But also, he has been attacked hard by many of these Democrats, more recently saying that is not allowed for a single school district to require masks in the building for students. Kids under the age of 12 cannot get vaccinated. Can you find an easier way to transmit COVID-19 across the state? I went back to school back in April of 2021. We wore masks for 8 hours every day. Was it fine? Absolutely. I had no problem with it, and I understand that littler kids might be harder to control about something like that, but you'd rather put in the effort to control them in terms of making sure that they're wearing their masks so that way they don't transmit it to their parents, their grandparents, to their teachers when they can't get vaccinated. I think that is a worthwhile investment than having more people die from the Delta variant or the Delta Plus variant or whatever type of variant decides to continue on, because these variants are being formed and found in unvaccinated people. This pandemic, as put by the Republicans, the Democrats, and the Independents, is the pandemic of the unvaccinated. And now that's starting to hit home in the state of Florida. That's starting to hit home around the nation. Florida just so happens to be one of those swing states with very high COVID cases compared to other states such as Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Iowa, Nevada, Colorado, Arizona, Florida, North Carolina, New Hampshire. All of these swing states are being hit with COVID a lot less than Florida. And Florida seems to be that hotspot that has been a hotspot for the entirety of the pandemic. And if COVID-19 becomes a key issue in 2022, Ron DeSantis is going to be the one blamed for it, the same way Donald Trump was back in 2020. So, thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.